Okay, so July was actually interesting, books-wise. I've read some really good ones and some real duds. But I also tried to switch between like classics and modern books, so let's discuss. As I was reading this book, I was wondering if the romance genre is just not for me in general, or if it's just this book that is not working for me. I think it's the latter. I've admitted on this channel before that I read fan fiction, and proud of it. And what's important today is that romance fiction and a huge subsection of fan fiction have a lot in common. So while I would never pick up a romance book in a bookstore or online, I am very much familiar with the structure of said books and the tropes that are the building blocks of them. But at the same time, I expect much more from the published novels because theoretically I'm paying the author to read these books. And I'm only saying theoretically because I got this book from the library. But so I'm perfectly fine with these books having tropes, but I also expect character work, theme, or at least some decent prose. Did I get it here? No, I did not. I picked up People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry because it was the only book of hers available in the library, and I heard good things about her as an author. It is about these two friends, Poppy and Alex, and they go on these extravagant vacations every year, and eventually they get together. Who could have guessed? So it is friends to lovers, slow burn, there was only one bed, and grumpy sunshine, I guess, tropes-wise. I'm probably not the biggest fan of Friends to Lovers. I didn't even like When Harry Met Sally, and that was the inspiration for the book, so that does not bode well for my enjoyment of said novel. Friends to Lovers can work if you do it right, because even in real life it could be the best thing. What could be better than friends becoming lovers? But in fiction, there is a certain balance that needs to be maintained. There needs to be something that keeps these characters apart beyond their emotional constipation, that is. If you have these characters who have been friends for over a decade and are attracted to each other from day one, and there is nothing really standing between them, like a partner or disapproving family, jobs, distance, whatever, then the only conclusion that the reader can draw is that they're idiots. And that's where my investment dies, because why aren't they together already? The book is told from Poppy's POV, and still I could see that Alex is attracted to her from like the first story that she tells. And I even thought for a moment that it was like he fell first type of narrative, but no, they just want each other in secret while they go on these extravagant vacations all around the world. Why does it take them 10 years to get together? Well, you tell me, because the book sure doesn't. That's another problem. The book wastes a lot of time describing these vacations that they go on, but they don't serve any purpose whatsoever. They don't progress the plot. They don't tell us anything new about the characters. It's just filler. There's nothing about Tuscany or any other location that deepens my understanding of these characters. Even Croatia, a breaking point for them, does nothing to explain what brought these two characters together. Even Palm Springs does more with "there was only one bed." These characters have almost nothing in common. Alex is this high-strung, protective type, caretaker who wants to settle down with a wife and kids, a teacher with a six-pack, and Poppy is easygoing, she wants to travel and meet new people. That is an obvious source of friction for them that never comes up until like the last 3 chapters of the book, when they actually start working on this, trying to understand who they are as people and what they want from life. But nothing in the previous 90% of the book has built to this, so it could have been axed because it all is inconsequential fluff, and the ending still would have been the same because it was set up and paid off right there. All of the character work is only done in those last 3 chapters, and that's not good. I needed to see more of what brought Alex and Poppy together, how they navigate their different personalities. Maybe they could have helped each other understand their varying shortcomings over the course of the story, and not by going to therapy separately in the last 3 chapters of the book. Not decent therapy, by the way, you should go. The setting of the story and the events happening there do nothing to explore the characters or their relationship, and that makes the book pointless. The main nail on the coffin, however, is that Alex and Poppy, they are not friends. They are two people who are very attracted to each other, maybe even love each other, dancing around each other for over a decade until that sexual tension finally breaks and they do it. There is one scene where they act supportive, like friends would do, and that's the one where Poppy is sick and Alex takes care of her. But even that scene gets ruined because they both later admit how much they wanted to have sex then but couldn't because she had high fever. Cool! Somebody said that the book had good prose. Well, that's setting the bar real low, isn't it? I listened to a portion of the book translated into Russian, and the translation was really bad. So then I switched to a portion in original English, and yeah, the translation was really, really bad. But the book, the original, was kind of mid. The quote that I pulled is, "His lips part for a moment, his green gold eyes like storm-flooded rivers, brutal and rushing." Is this good for you? I wanted more. Also, because the translation was really bad, I stumbled every time that she used the phrase "set puppy face" because it was translated so poorly, but she did also overuse that phrase quite a bit. So there is nothing particularly special about the prose either. Also, can I say that the title, "People We Meet on Vacation," is terrible and doesn't even reflect the theme of the book, if it has one? I think I'm not gonna pick up a modern romance anytime soon, so let's try something different, shall we? Now, The Woman of 30 by Honore de Balzac is more of what I expected Madame Bovary to be. I raved about how boring Madame Bovary is, and this book isn't. However, it's also far from perfect. Thematically, it works, and we will talk about the theme in a little bit, but the main shortcoming of the book is its inconsistency. Balzac changes the style every chapter, and with the constant time jumps, it really weighs you down. The time jumps could have worked, but the book is really short, so the slice of life chapters that the book is made of, because we essentially see small scenes from the characters' lives over the course of the main character's Julie's life, they don't work. Because a lot is left unsaid in between these chapters, and so the character work suffers quite a bit. You need to infer a lot about these characters, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but the characters tend to act very weirdly, so I could have used a little bit more explanation on them. And then there are the style changes. Some chapters are really plot-driven and action-packed, others are basically just character work, and others are ponderings of Balzac on the theme. And a good book can have all of these elements, you just need to blend them a little bit better than Balzac did, so the book can flow, and otherwise it just feels episodic and disjointed. The theme is love and relationships, mainly with our main character, Julie, our woman of 30, and her daughters as well, eventually. Julie marries a man who dazzles her, but after the marriage it turns out that he was all sizzle and no fill, so Julie becomes quickly disillusioned with love and life, and even when she takes on a lover and falls in love with him, it ends rather tragically, and that also once again hardens her heart. Her relationships with men transfer to her children, another theme. For instance, her eldest daughter, Hélène, who is born from the husband that Julie despises, and Hélène feels this distance from her mother, and she feels kind of guilty but also angry about it, and that leads to the most bonkers bananas love story for her in the man that she chooses to marry. The explanation is that she feels this connection to this man, they are kindred spirits or whatever, but if you've read the book, you know how out of nowhere it comes. Hélène is supposed to represent this absolute love and devotion towards her husband, as she cannot even imagine a life without him. She exists in this world where she is completely and totally devoted to him, while he in turn also worships her, and that's something that Julie never got in life. But at the same time, Julie's other daughter, her favorite Maïna, follows in her mother's footsteps and chooses a man not worthy of her. We see these different scenarios that the women play out for us as far as like interpersonal relationships goes and the place of a woman in the household. I cannot say that the theme is explored to its fullest potential. Balzac tries, but at the same time I'm always wary of these 19th century men trying to write women and explore the deepest stresses of their souls. Balzac has these ideas about the role of women and their place in the household, specifically that they are supposed to be totally devoted to their husbands, and that dates the book quite a bit. There is an interesting idea in there with Julie early on when she realizes who her husband really is, and she's rather resentful because she wanted to marry a man who would be in charge of his life and who could also be in charge of her. And since he cannot do that, she is forced to be in charge of the household. The husband also finds some level of respect for her, but it's also that type where he doesn't take her seriously or as her own person. So there is a conflict right there about the place of a woman in the society and in the household, but it doesn't even really need to be feminist, really. It can be explored within the time period, it doesn't. Balzac tries to find this woman's purpose in love and what love means for the women, but he's also a 19th century man and thus quite chauvinistic, so I do not think that he got that right. It's frustrating because I think that Balzac had things to say, it's just all got lost in the sauce. I think the main thing that saves this book is that Balzac writes beautiful prose with like the most perfectly chosen metaphors and allegories. When he chooses to do descriptions of like the weather or the countryside, he does it just enough for us to get a glimpse without it becoming over the top. I feel like I should try something else by him, like just for that particular prose alone. Fun fact, Russian language adopted an idiom, women of Balzac's age, to represent the women between 30 and 40. That's me. Now the next book might just well be my new favorite book. Or at least my favorite book of short stories. You know that feeling when you're reading a book and you just feel it? It makes you excited to read, almost giddy. I had that same feeling when I was reading The Grey House early in the year. I have a video on it, but I got the same butterflies with this book. Shit Cassandra saw is what I want contemporary modern fiction to be. The collection consists of very different short stories. Some are very grounded, some are mystical and like supernatural, fantastical, but all of them work. I found this book on some list of feminist books to read, and I do sincerely hope that whoever added it there read more than the first story, because that one does read like an angry feminist manifesto, and I'm all for it. The prologue and the first story are on the angrier side, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not mad at it. I also find the title of the first story, Shit Cassandra Saw but didn't tell the Trojans, because at that point, fuck them anyways, matches at least some of my sensibilities. The book is not all like that. Some of the stories are softer, but at least it should set the mood for what that compilation is going to be like. At the same time, I cannot even say that the book is overly feminist, or at least it didn't read as such for me. For me, it was like a collection of stories about people, some of whom happen to be women. There is a phrase that is sometimes used online, like, I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. And I feel like that describes my attitude towards a lot of these characters here. I want my characters to be flawed, but not in that complex way that Dostoevsky does, where all of them are just awful that you cannot even root for anybody. And it's not even a fair comparison, the medium is completely different, the intention is as well. But my point is that people are never just good or bad. They make decisions and they act in a way that could tip the scale either way. But I still want to read about these regular-ass people who just make it through their lives and make these choices that could make them good or bad, but it doesn't really work like that in the real world either way. So I just want to read about these flawed individuals who could be real assholes or really good people, and just that. For example, there is a story of a woman who is cheating on her husband. Not a good thing to do, I would think we all agree. But that makes her interesting. We get a glimpse at her life. We see how she navigates this complicated situation that she put herself in, the way that she rationalizes it and what goes in her head. But we, and the author, we don't get to make a moral judgment on her. We get to look in on her and many other characters over the course of the collection and just see their lives unfold. The stories are very different. There are ones about female pirates and the witches of the 16th century, or about a modern teenage girl and her coming-of-age story, or of a woman whose husband just left her and her going through her crisis. My favorite one is probably the second proper story about a guy leaving a Yelp review. That's where I was reading it and I was like, yes, this is good. I get it. I'm here for it. Let's keep going. This story shows best what Gwen Kirby does with these stories. There is this frame of a guy leaving a review on a restaurant that he didn't like, but through his ramblings, he reveals so much about himself, about his marriage, about his career. And you for sure have met a person like that who overshares, who trauma dumps on you. And it's done in such a brilliant and clever way, in the way that he crumbles that information in. It's brilliant. This story probably shows best what Gwen Kirby does with these stories. The strongest beat is also that it is written in the way that people speak, and that fits the story, obviously, so that's cool. The other stories are like that too, subtle and clever in the way that she reveals information about the characters. Short stories can be complicated as a genre because you have way less time to explore the characters and progress the plot than the novels do. But I think that Gwen Kirby does it brilliantly here. She does this thing where she reveals just enough about the characters for it to be satisfying to the audience, but also to the plot. The only thing is that I personally absolutely loved it, but I'm not 100% sure that you will. I doubt I would ever recommend this compilation to my girlfriends, but I would say that if you were to pick it up, just give it a chance. Try a few stories before you make a judgment, and maybe you will feel the same way that I did, and that it is brilliant. Now, after that, I read a very tiresome Russian book that I'm going to be doing a full review on, so I needed to read something lighter, and I actually made a really good choice on this one. Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a perfectly good piece of popular fiction. That's the type of book you read for fun, and there is nothing wrong with that. It reads as if you're watching a movie, and I think they're turning it into a motion picture, so that tracks. I was actually a little apprehensive in the beginning because this old Hollywood thing is not really for me, and the first few chapters actually proved me right on that front. But then the book actually gets to its main theme and the main plot, and so that's fine. I'm hella surprised that the book is still available here on the Russian sites. They must have missed it in the LGBT purge that they've done. As I was writing down my thoughts on the book, I almost fell into the trap of overanalyzing the book, and you really shouldn't do that. That's not the book for it. When we talk about pop literature, I don't want to say that the bar is lower, it's not that. It's just that I'm looking for slightly different things. Instead of these complicated themes and exploration of the nature of man and deep philosophy, what I'm looking for is a good enough plot structure with well-written characters and a decent conflict. And this book has it all. It has a decent story, the life of Evelyn Hugo and who was actually the love of her life. Character motivations are there, and they are rooted in the character work and the main conflict of the novel. The end reveal works as it builds on Evelyn's character, but also ties these two narratives within the story together. I even teared up when one of the husbands died. I liked him quite a bit. What the author does well is she works carefully with details, almost like according to the Chekhov's gun. She introduces plot elements and details early on that you would think are just background information or character build that come back later in the story and are actually relevant plot points. That was very well done, but at the same time I expected Evelyn's dresses that kick off the plot to have more significance, but they didn't. One point of criticism that I could have is the current day storyline and the character of the journalist. Since she's not a random person and her relationship with Evelyn is actually important, I maybe would have liked a little bit more about her, like who she is as a person, why she divorced, what her life is like, and maybe see a little bit more progression in her kind of assertiveness that she picks up from Evelyn, because it's done rather bluntly in the book. At the same time, the book is about Evelyn, so she probably got enough spotlight. The title actually chafed me for a long time. Why is it called The Husbands when the book is actually about Evelyn? But then the reveal happens at the end and it is explained. So yeah, I'm fine with that. Overall, I can see why Book Talk loves this book, and for once they're right, it's pretty good. Now we will travel back in time. Dangerous Liaisons by Choderlos de Laclos, a rather scandalous novel of its time, and I had a lot of fun reading it. I was wary at first because it is an epistolary novel, meaning a novel consisting entirely of letters between the characters. It has obvious pitfalls, like medium-wise. There is one letter in particular that comes to mind from Marquise de Marteil, where she essentially gives her villain origin story to Valmont, and it is delivered as a villain monologue. And I don't particularly like when character information is delivered like this. That's why I don't like Dostoevsky, he does that a lot. However, the author won me over from the get-go because the novel opens with a fake editor's note, where this fictional editor says that yes, he's publishing these letters, but he also notes that these events couldn't have possibly taken place at the time listed, and especially in France, such debauchery couldn't have happened in our distinguished society. Whoever wrote these letters must have been mistaken. And I was like, yeah, I get you. I hear you. I'm all for it, dear author. Now, it needs to be said that I was familiar with the plot of the novel before I started reading the book. You might be too, because I've seen these movie adaptation, Cruel Intentions, set in the modern day, starring Reese Witherspoon, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and this guy. And the broad strokes are the same. The story is about these two, Marquise de Marteil and Vicomte de Valmont, who are scheming for their own perverse pleasure. He wants to seduce a married woman. She wants to get revenge on a former lover by ruining his fiancée. And since these two are also former lovers and now friends, they keep each other updated and even help each other out. Obviously, the novel focuses on these interpersonal relationships, framed as the battle of sexes, where love and lust are a battlefield, but also the depth of deception and manipulation that a person can sink down to. And actually, the epistolary genre actually lends itself perfectly to these themes. First, we get the POV of a man and a woman, both equally perverse, and their opinion on any situation and their views on each other's tactics and methods of seduction. And then there is this stark difference in the way that Valmont writes to the woman he's trying to seduce, full of false promises in grand mots. And then he writes about the same situation to Marquise de Marteil without any pomp and circumstance, showing his true face so that even the most clueless reader can see his true intentions. And also, for 18th century book, it is quite racy. Obviously, it's all done in innuendos and like wink wink nudge nudge, but there is no doubt as to what's going on here. And it could have even been a little erotic had any of it been consensual. And I would have loved the book even more had Valmont stayed in this Dubcon area, because there is one woman that he makes her fall in love with him under false pretenses, so it's a little bit Dubcon. But the other one, he takes her by force, and so it's like straight non-con, and I'm like, no, please don't do it to her. It would have been so easy to make her fall in love with you as well, please stay there. He didn't. He even manages to gaslight her into thinking that she wanted it. You hear sometimes on the internet that we've invented all of these things in the 21st century, like depression or emotional abuse. Nah, it's always been there. We're just giving it names. Valmont is the red flag city. Every single word of this man's mouth is emotional manipulation, gaslighting, victim blaming. And it's a book from the 18th century, so it's all there. Fun. Interestingly, Valmont is framed as a villain from the get-go, but he has a rival-ish, a man called Danceny, who is framed as a lover to the virginal Cécile. But what I found interesting is that Danceny writes to Cécile in the same way as Valmont, just less skillfully. Same gaslighting, same emotional manipulation, but he is supposed to be the good guy here. Although there are truly no good guys in this story. I was wondering if the movie adaptation changed the ending, and they did. But unfortunately, De Laclos goes full moralistic ending here. The last two letters quite literally spell out the moral here, but also the way that these characters end, no one gets a happy ending. But I guess in the 18th century, there was no chance in hell that the book would get published if it didn't punish these characters or at least condemn their behavior. I just cannot help but think that if someone were to write this book today, Valmont and Marquise, they probably would have gotten away with it and maybe run off together. And I want to read that fanfiction. Overall, the book does hold up to this day. It's just that you need to put yourself in that 18th century mindset and then you're good to go. I particularly enjoyed theatrically gasping at the smallest indiscretions, like when he sees her ankle or something, and that's considered to be completely immoral. It's fun. And the last book is The Coincidence Makers by Yoav Blum. I had fun with it. It's the type of light summer reading that I want. I actually picked it up to unwind from a very dense academic paper that I was reading, and it was perfectly fit for purpose. The pitch is that there are these coincidence makers, the people who can make things happen in very complicated and convoluted ways, the things that we would call coincidences, a meet-cute, a random run-in with a childhood friend, things like that. And the book has that. Our main character does make things happen, but he also struggles with his own character, with his own free will. There is a love story, all of that fun stuff. I don't actually have much to say about the book. I had fun reading it. There is a twist in the end that I only figured out as it was happening. I'm actually quite a sucker for it. I almost never figure out the twist before it's revealed, so I'm not a good barometer for how well hidden it was. But I think it was a decent twist that fit the ending that was really, really cute. And I think that's the main characteristic of the book. It has this lightheartedness to it that I enjoy. Some reviewers called it boring. I didn't feel that. I felt maybe the book was slightly underexplored, especially when the end reveal happens. It raises more questions about the whys and the hows of this world. But at the same time, the author drops these pieces of information throughout the book that seem completely out of place and nonsensical, but they do come back in the end and they are plot relevant, so there is that. If anything, I felt like the book could have been longer and dived deeper into the lore and the action and all of that. The author also tries for philosophy. He constantly goes on these little tangents. You can take it or leave it. I personally didn't find it particularly interesting, but at least he's trying to do something with the concept. Because there are some valuable themes that he raises, not only of the free will, which is the central one, but also happiness and our activity and proactivity and our involvement in other people's lives. The only thing to mention, if you're thinking about picking up this book, is that the little blurb, the summary at the back of the book, it makes it seem a lot more action-packed than it actually is. It specifically mentions the serial killer on the loose. And while there is a serial killer in the book, it's way less action-driven. It's much more about the characters, the relationships, the philosophy. So don't expect a wild ride of a story. It's much slower, more introspective, and I don't mind. For the record, I also read Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, but as soon as I got to the main theme, I was like, nope, that's far too grim for July. November, this is a book made for November, so that's probably when I'm gonna come back to it. And that's it for July. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what did you think about them.